Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to a special edition of Inside Scoop. Tonight we have a forum for candidates to the Virginia House of Delegates with districts here in Fairfax County. I'm Catherine Reed from the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area, and I will be your moderator this evening. We are pleased to partner with a number of community and service groups in sponsoring this forum. Like the League, our partners are committed to supporting the democratic process by providing opportunities to hear from the candidates and compare their responses and encouraging community participation. We are grateful to the volunteers from Inside Scoop and the staff of Fairfax Public Access for their help in providing this venue, and we thank all of the many volunteers who have given hours and effort in organizing this event. We particularly thank all of you for watching tonight. This is what American democracy looks like at its best. An opportunity to examine the issues factually, to ask questions regarding the things most important to us, and to explore the candidates' positions. You may call in questions for the candidates tonight at 571-749-1142, and that number will come up on your screen if you didn't get it the first time. Here's the format. All candidates certified to appear on the November 5th ballot were invited to participate in this event. Four candidates are here in person, and the others chose not to attend or send a representative. I will introduce each candidate, who will then have 2 minutes for opening remarks. After the first question, I will rotate the order in which candidates give 90 seconds answers to your questions. At the conclusion of the question time, each candidate will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. After the forum, candidates will be given a list of the questions asked and the additional questions submitted. They may post answers to some or all of the questions on their websites. The candidates have agreed to these rules, so let's get started. The candidates will each have 2 minutes to make opening remarks. Let's start with Delegate Vivian Watts of the 39th House District. Delegate Watts.
Thank you very much. The 39th District is centered around the mixing bowl, Beltway 95, and fingers out throughout Annandale and Springfield. I've represented the area in various forms, been gerrymandered a couple of times for a few years, and sometimes the issue comes up, well, Vivian, how long? And I will basically answer, as long as I stay up to date, which is what I think the obligation is for someone such as myself. I realized one year, not too many years ago, very frustrating session, what am I still doing here, that if I stayed up to date, there's a real value in all of the many issues that I have been involved in, partly because of the turnover that we have within the General Assembly, and that we need to have that breadth of consideration so that all of the voices and unintended consequences are heard. So when I go door to door, which I love doing, I have an interesting grip card which has any number of things, which starts as organized. The 5 rules of politics. First rule is attend the meeting. Second rule, pay your dues. And that's what I've been doing for many, many years, 15 years as an active citizen. And in attending the meetings and pay your dues, which I absolutely continue today to be up to date and to stay in touch, mental health, veteran services, environment, very definitely the budget and fiscal concerns, business development, economics, all of those things continue, fortunately, to allow me to be a part of that 5th rule of politics, which originally read, don't get mad, get even. Well, I interpret that, especially having been in the minority by 2 to 1 more than once, that get things done. And because of that, I've been invited into the meetings and been able to have good input on transportation and other issues we'll be discussing this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Next, we have Ms. Rachel Mace, who is challenging an incumbent in District 41. Welcome. This is, I think, your first foray into politics.
Yes, it is. I'm Rachel Mace, and I'm a longtime Fairfax resident. I actually went to Fairfax High School and met my husband there, and we Love it here very much. We don't ever want to leave. Unfortunately, it is getting very expensive to live here. And it's one of the reasons that I decided to foray into politics was it is very expensive to live here. And so I'd like to take a moment to talk about what a libertarian is. It is not a Republican. It's not a Democrat. And you can find all of our platform planks on lp.org. And it's a good place to go to see how we distinguish ourselves. We are inclusive. We like to think about the individual at the very minor level. So every person has a different story, has a different identity, and we like to think of them as the individual and how we can maximize their rights. The worst thing that would happen if you decided to elect me would be that I would have to read the bills and I'd have to get along with everybody in the delegation because I don't have any allies. I would be probably one of the only libertarians, if not the only libertarian, serving in the House of Delegates. And I'm prepared to make bargains and deals and compromise on things that matter to you, that bring a better experience to you living here in Virginia. I'd love to address the disparities in proportional tax rates in Nova because Nova residents pay proportionally higher taxes to live here, but the cost of living is much higher as well. It seems unfair and much more regressive than it should be. And so those are things that I think about when I thought about running. Another thing I thought about was criminal justice reform. We have a lot of issues in Virginia where we could use some work, which include legalization of marijuana. Some people say decriminalization is a good first stop. I don't believe so. I believe that there will still be racially disparate enforcement of marijuana violations, and I just don't think that's fair. I'd also love to see us work on civil asset forfeiture because the ACLU gives us a D. And that's pretty much my story. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next we have Delegate Kathy Tran, who is from the 42nd House District.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm Kathy Tran. I currently represent the 42nd District in the Virginia House of Delegates. And the 42nd District is located entirely within Fairfax County, covers parts of Mount Vernon, Lorton, Springfield, and Fairfax Station. In 2017, I made the decision to run for office. As a mom of 4 young children, I realized that I needed to stand up for the values of hope, opportunity, and freedom that my parents had risked our lives for coming here as boat refugees from Vietnam. And I am incredibly proud of the work that we have accomplished the last 2 years, my first term, to make sure that all Virginians have access to opportunities to succeed and thrive. I'm proud that we passed Medicaid expansion and given access to health care to over 300,000 Virginians just only in the last 9 months to date. That we have invested more into our public schools, given our teachers a 5% pay raise, and really began to tackle the issues of college affordability by freezing tuition at our public universities and making sure that there's more financial aid available for our eligible students. We've also brought back more money for our transportation infrastructure, for the first time having dedicated state funding for Metro, as well as bringing back $20 million about for our roads in Northern Virginia. And we've also begun to reform our democracy by really tackling the issue of gerrymandering. So to make sure that every single vote is counted equally here in the Commonwealth. This is just some of the progress we've made in the last 2 years, and I'm really proud of that. I look forward to tonight's conversation and to being able to share what I'd like to accomplish if reelected to represent the 42nd District. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Tran. So, Delegate Alfonso Lopez from the 49th House District.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alfonso Lopez. I represent the 49th House of Delegates District, which is 79% in Arlington and 21% in Fairfax, mostly around the Bailey's Crossroads, Seven Corners area. My district is actually one of the most diverse districts in the entirety of the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are over 108 languages spoken in our district, and 51 languages spoken at our local high school. We are the rich tapestry of what Virginia is becoming. And I feel like a lot of my time in the House of Delegates is explaining that rich tapestry to folks who either don't see diversity or maybe don't want to see diversity sometimes. And so what I find myself doing a great deal of the time in the House of Delegates is talking about our values, our Virginia values of compassion and openness and acceptance, and trying to ensure that those values are embraced in our Virginia State Code. And so I truly believe in a Virginia that lifts everyone up and leaves no one behind. It's important that we continue to always have that value, that credo, that creed, and the idea that Virginia can be a better place moving forward, and we can make opportunity for everyone. So I look forward to the conversation this evening, and thank you for the League of Women Voters for having this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. So the first question, I'm going to go back to Ms. Mace because she brought up the legalization, decriminalization of marijuana, and I think criminal justice reform is something, it's a huge issue, but it's something that the voters of Virginia have clearly expressed they're interested in tackling. So I'm going to ask you, and it's a big issue, but since you started out with marijuana as your starting point, what are some of the ways in which you think we can tackle criminal justice reform here in the Commonwealth of Virginia?
So the reason I chose marijuana is because the use of marijuana and the possession of marijuana is something that Virginia still kind of enforces pretty heavily. And it is usually racially disparate in how enforcement is, tried among people. And it's one of the things that gets to me is if you say it's your body, it's your choice, then it should be your body and it should be your choice and your decision to use or consume marijuana as well. It should not be up to the state to decide whether that is something that you should or should not do. Beyond that, ruining people's lives because you made the decision to smoke a plant when you were 21 is something that I have to grapple with as a mother, wondering whether my children might, choose to smoke marijuana and then lose out on job opportunities for something they did once. So it is a big deal for me. And I want to see us as a Commonwealth look at what matters to people. And right now, people want us to legalize marijuana. It's wildly popular in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is good for people to have a voice. And if they say we want to legalize and we want to have a safe and reliable place to purchase our marijuana, we should give them that option. That would be a good start. And we can move beyond that with criminal justice reform because a lot of issues that we have are under suspicion. I smelled marijuana. I thought I saw him smoking a joint or her smoking a joint. So really just looking at that as a whole and what different levels of crimes that we can reduce sentencing for and enforcement for so that we don't have people needlessly being targeted.
Thank you very much. Delegate Tran, criminal justice reform.
Oh, I think that's such an incredibly important topic, particularly, understanding how our policies are disproportionately affecting our African American, Latinx, or Latinx communities in Virginia, and I think it's so important that we do that. There are just a couple things I want to highlight from the last 2 years that we've been able to pass, so that folks know about some of the progress we've been able to make in this area. We've changed school suspension policies in Virginia. I think it used to be that somebody in 4th grade or above could be suspended for 364 days of the year. So we have really, reduced that so that we're starting to dismantle the school to prison pipeline that Virginia unfortunately is known for. We've also increased the felony larceny threshold from $250 to $500. So that's like, if you made a mistake and stole a pair of shoes almost, in this day and age, that would be on your record for forever, right? And so we have increased that and really should also be thinking about ways to increase that threshold as well. But we've made that incremental step in the last 2 years, and that hadn't been changed since, I believe, the early 80s, right? One of the areas that I'm particularly interested in exploring that I've heard from constituents is what happens to people's records now. If they were convicted under the previous felony larceny threshold and it's been on their record, are there opportunities to expunge if folks have, kind of been doing a good job, right? Since their conviction, if they've served their time, completed probation, and all of that, can we give them a second chance of really looking at their records expungement? So I'm dealing with that right now.
Excellent. Delegate Lopez.
This is an issue that we are going to be dealing with for the next several years, actually, and I'm very proud of the work we were able to do in the General Assembly just over the last 2 years. I'm very also proud of the fact that legislation that I've been working on for 3 years, the suspension of driver's licenses, was finally addressed. The idea that we have this modern-day debtor's prison where if you do not pay your court fees and fines, that your driver's license can be taken away. It's this sort of odd catch-22 that if you can't drive to get to work, how are you going to pay back your court fines and fees? And then that affects everything else, and it's this slippery slope that sort of cascades and hurts everyone's lives as they're trying to avoid recidivism. On top of that, we need to definitely address restoration of rights finally in the state code and the state constitution. We have to address cash bail reform, civil assets forfeiture. The felony threshold, of course, has to be increased from $500 to at least $1,500 or $2,000. And then also, there's currently an effort going on to address, honestly, parts of the Virginia Code that were drafted during the segregationist bird machine, and that are still in the Virginia State Code. And so there are there's actually a commission working on that issue right now. So criminal justice reform in the Commonwealth of Virginia is going to take not just one session, it's going to be several sessions of really working on addressing this and truly addressing issues of equity and justice.
Oh, thank you, Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
Thank you. Adding to what is said, because as you said, it's such a large topic, there are many other areas as well. Let me start with this one. 1902 is when the Constitution carried the language that if you were a felon, you would lose your right to vote. And that was done for one reason only, and that was to keep blacks from voting, with the idea of we'll go out and we'll make those arrests. If there happens to be some whites that are captured in this, the governor can always forgive and pardon the individual. And that insidious element of criminal justice remains today. While blacks use marijuana at about the same rate as white, the number of arrests are 7 times. So there are many elements of that we also need to be dealing with, and we deal with it in other elements besides what has been mentioned. I've been very active on the mental health efforts in the state, including here in Fairfax County as far as the loss of lives in some of the arrests that took place. And one of the elements is crisis intervention training, where more and more law enforcement are being schooled in how to take down a incident rather than expand it. And they are moving this into more and more fields as it is realized that this helps in the gathering of evidence, not just in crisis intervention where you might be dealing with mental health, but still 20% of our people in jail are now there with a diagnosed mental health disease, and it's another important element that we need to deal with in giving proper services.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question, I'm going to make this sort of a follow-up question because you've teased out some very important things here with criminal justice reform. One is the opioid crisis and how we deal with people who are addicted rather than putting them in prison as criminals, treating their addiction, but also talking about the fact that we have dockets here that are specialized in addiction. We have dockets for mental health. We have different dockets. I know that Fairfax County tends to be a little bit ahead of a lot of the other parts of the state, but I think in other parts of the state, we're starting to see the court systems decide to parse out who is actually being charged. And I'm just going to say right here, this is one of the reasons that people need to pay attention this year to how many different offices are being elected. Sheriffs are being elected in this year. Commonwealth's attorneys are being elected. Your delegates, your senators. We need, if we're talking about criminal justice reform, we really need to talk about things like Medicaid expansion and whether there's adequate funds in Medicaid to actually address the mental health needs of the Commonwealth of Virginia. All of this is intertwined and intermixed. So I'm going to punt this to Kathy Tran to talk a little bit about, how the legislature is in fact dealing with the intersection of some of these issues.
Thanks for that's a biggie. I think that when we look at bills generally, we understand that it's not an isolated issue, right? I mean, even in this one particular area, we're talking about equity, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about healthcare, education, treatment, and other types of community-based services. And then I think you were so right, Catherine, in just pointing out that there are other elected officials who also play such an incredibly important role. And so our role as state delegates is also to intersect with our local elected officials to make sure that we're lifting up those promising practices and trying to either spread them or embed them in the code in different ways. And understanding also how our state policies are truly being implemented at the local level and are affecting the lives of our communities, within our communities. And so, I just want to say on Medicaid expansion, I remember when we hit the, just about the 300,000 mark just a couple weeks ago, I had read an article where it was noted that for the first time, many of these individuals were seeing a doctor for the first time this year, right, in over a year. And many of them were dealing with mental health situations, with substance abuse, with cancer and other illnesses. And so in looking more broadly at healthcare expansion, for example, it's trying to also understand the different populations that are being affected and the different types of care that they are seeking and might need. And that, I think, overall, is such an important aspect of how we look at policies.
Thank you. Delegate Lopez.
Drug courts work. Drug courts work. And we need to empower that model in every part of the Commonwealth. Along those same lines, we need treatment and not charges and convictions. One of the things that I've been focusing on the last several years as a part of the Science and Technology Committee is data analytics and taking advantage of all of the data we have and using it in such a way through artificial intelligence and machine learning to empower decision makers to make decisions faster about where the problems are occurring, not just on a year-to-year, but a maybe day-to-day level where resources need to be allocated, where they know that there's a large batch of opioids that are bad, or that you're seeing more deaths or more overdoses happen, and so something needs to be done quicker, faster, more effectively by the state infrastructure. The fact is that the tools are there, but sometimes the funding is not there, and sometimes the fact, just as my colleague Delegate Tran just mentioned, the idea that these aren't just silos, that we're all bringing each of these different agencies together to make sure that they can all address the problem. And that's going to take funding, and that's going to take a different kind of thinking than I think we've had over the last 15, 20 years.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
Thank you. While funding is part of the picture, drug courts work as we proved more than 20 years ago. But that concept has not been expanded in the last 20 years. Instead, we have to deal with veterans' dockets or mental health dockets, where we no longer have the tools that we can use in drug courts based on the person's response to therapy and response to the proper changes in lifestyle, be able to actually expunge the record, which we have not been able to do. Instead, we have been controlled by a philosophy of do the crime, do the time. And I serve on the criminal law subcommittee and have for years, and I can't tell you how often I have heard that. So this is one of the important elements that I'm looking forward to in criminal justice reform. I mentioned crisis intervention training. That is actually just the first step in the program that is so effective in saving money as well as people's lives in what is called diversion first, that comes out of Texas. And there are many elements where we can go in constructively and look at the behavior rather than automatic conviction that leads to a lifetime, oftentimes, of dysfunctionality, because you have to check the box every time that you apply for the job because of the kind of events that happen in paying off fines and other elements we've discussed.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Ms. Mace.
So I love the idea with Ms. Watts bringing up the checking the box, and that is something that people think about when it comes to addiction. They say with addiction that in order for you to get better, you have to want to be better. My mother had experience working with a drug and alcohol rehab center, a nonprofit, and it really is true. You have to want to get better. One of the big hurdles people face is a past criminal record for drug use, and the difficult thing about that is you're incriminating somebody and you're telling somebody that they're a criminal for something they did to their own body. And whether or not you like what they did to their body, it's still a medical issue. It is not a criminal issue. Unless it involves the hurting of someone else or taking their stuff, it is not a criminal matter. It is a health matter. So first and foremost, I think it is important to remove those barriers that people have to bringing their addiction to somebody to get help. One of the biggest barriers people have is saying, hey, I'm an addict. When you say, hey, I'm an addict, you don't know if that person's going to turn you in or be upset at you. You don't know if that person knows a cop or is a cop. You want to be able to go to someone and say, I got into this drug and I need help getting out. Portugal has had some success with decriminalizing drugs, and I think there's a lot of learning that can be had and a lot of discussions that can be had about that model and what elements, if some or if all, maybe we could use. And I think before we start throwing funding at it or discussing funding, we need to have a plan of action. What are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? And how do we expect it to work? And I think with that, we can help address the addiction problem.
Thank you very much, Ms. May. So this wouldn't be the League of Women Voters if we did not address the question of the Equal Rights Amendment. So I'm going to let Delegate Alfonso Lopez talk about what he sees as the future of the ERA. What are the hurdles with getting the ERA to a floor vote? And what do you think will happen if it actually ends up on the floor this year in 2020?
Okay. Thank you for this question, because my first political memory was my mom carrying me on her back when I was 4 years old in 1974 at a rally in front of the White House on the Equal Rights Amendment. My mom used to have these great T-shirts that said "A woman's place is in the House and the Senate." I actually put the constitutional amendment in 3 years ago for the Equal Rights Amendment in memory of my mom. And I supported the work of our freshmen, especially Hala Ayala and Jennifer Carroll Foy this year, to get the bill passed, to get the constitutional amendment pushed forward. To answer your question, it's about the majority. It's about, if we have a Democratic majority in the House of Delegates in January of next year, you will see the Equal Rights Amendment pass in the House of Delegates, and you will see it pass in the state Senate. That's the truth. That's the facts. That's the strategy. Because even when the Republicans said they were for it, they wouldn't pass it. Even when they said that you can count us as supporters of this piece of legislation, they still wouldn't pass it, because they viewed it as a procedural issue to get it to the floor. Fact is, that's not how we're going to play in the future. That's not how the Virginia General Assembly should be. And the Equal Rights Amendment is something that should have happened 15, 25, 45 years ago. It actually should have happened at the founding. And it's going to happen next year if we have a Democratic majority.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
I'm going to speak to a couple of the arguments that I hear most frequently. I'm a University of Michigan grad, and upon the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, it was interesting to hear an account of Martha Griffiths, who was in the Congress at the time, and her ability to amend the Civil Rights Act when it was so tenuous, no amendments at all were allowed. But she stood up, and despite the laughter that was there, she managed to amend it so it included sex as well, equal opportunity as far as sex. So I mention that because what we have seen in the last 50 years has all been under the Civil Rights Act. It is not guaranteed in the Constitution. If it were guaranteed in the Constitution, we wouldn't have needed to have the right to vote put in the Constitution. The essential nature of protecting Title IX, of protecting EEOC, of protecting all of the things that have allowed women to use, and I love the leadership that we have among the new women in the House of Delegates, particularly Jennifer Carroll Foy and Hala Ayala, because they speak with that strength of professional competence that in their lifetime, from the day they were born under the Civil Rights Act, have been able to take their place. And it's the Equal Rights Amendment that will allow that to continue.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Ms. Mace.
Based on what I've read about the Equal Rights Amendment, falls in line with my belief in freedom and equality for everyone. I would want to reread it, obviously, if I were in the House of Delegates, because I'm the only one here that's not an incumbent. So I'd want to read it and obviously discuss it and just ensure that it covers everything it needs to. But libertarians generally recognize everyone as an individual that is completely and totally equal to every other individual. We do not believe that it is anyone's business, whether you are male, female, or choose not to identify, whether you identify as straight, lesbian, anything you identify with is none of our business, and it shouldn't be the business of walking through society either. However, in some cases, there have been bills that have been brought forward in other states where it's under the guise of equal rights, but really it's something else attached to the guise. So I would want to read for that purpose. But from what I've seen, it seems like something that I could definitely get behind and support. I'm a breadwinning mother of two, and I attend grad school, and I will plan to graduate in December 2019, and I believe that is all possible because of the fight that people have had before me, because of the women who fought before me. And so I definitely take up the mantle to ensure that women have equal rights, and that the government and private sector that we don't impede them from what they need to do. But I would want to read it first, because I believe that I should read everything before I agree to it.
Thank you very much. So we have had, yes, you're right, it's your turn. Back to you, Delegate Tran.
So I'll just tell a quick anecdote. In the 42nd District was the site at the Lorton Workhouse where Alice Paul and other suffragists were imprisoned around the start of World War I because they were protesting for the right to vote. And the humane treatment that they received during their imprisonment became the turning point that led to the passage of the 19th Amendment. And as we get ready to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of the right to vote for women, that we should be, enshrining women's equality into our Constitution. It's way past time. And so I look forward to being able to vote yes again this coming session. Thanks.
Before I go on to the next question, I just want to do a little educational moment here to say that the majority party elects the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House makes the committee assignments. These bills don't get to the floor for a floor vote unless the committees pass them out for a floor vote. So the majority party decides how they pack those committees. And that's what you need to understand, that it's not just a bill goes through and gets voted on the floor. The majority party decides who's on the committee, and those committees decide whether the ERA goes to a floor vote or not. So,
Or even if the committee votes at all.
Or if the committee votes, and that's a whole separate thing, isn't it,
Right.
Delegate Lopez? So we've gotten a question that's been phoned in or tweeted in or emailed in, and it's about climate change. And climate change certainly is on everyone's mind. So I'm kicking this over to Delegate Watts. Climate change is such a big issue, and natural gas pipelines contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Are you against these types of projects? If so, do you oppose these two new proposed Virginia pipelines, Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Transco Southeastern Trail project?
This is going to be hard to get in a minute and a half, and maybe we'll come back to it. Let me start with this. My first priority is wind energy off the coast. We are so ideally located, and we have broken ground. And within a few years, from being one of 9 states who has 0 wind power, we will become the state with the most wind power as this lease in federal waters is expanded to 200 turbines. Then it has to be grid transformation so that solar power, wherever it is generated, can be part of the grid and energy can be shared rather than coming from just a few coal generation or nuclear generation plants. The role of natural gas, unfortunately, while it has reduced our reliance on coal, the most deep concern to me is that the gases are 40 times more, I don't like to use the word effective, in trapping and creating greenhouse gases. So it is not a step forward to be using methane. And therefore, on that basis, whereas I had opposed the pipelines unless they met all of the environmental standards as far as construction, I am now of such deep concern about the crisis that we're in and needing to break the greenhouse gas effect to the greatest degree possible that I now oppose the pipeline themselves as well.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Ms. Mace.
One of my biggest concerns about pipeline projects and things like that, using Canada as example, is eminent domain. I believe that, the government, just because they want to, or corporations that are given government sort of handouts in a way, I don't believe they should just take people's land. You should offer them a fair value first and foremost. If they want to give up the land, they will, and if they don't, you'll have to work around it. So that's my first and foremost on any sort of project of that sort. Secondly, I don't particularly want to see a future of us using constant natural gas, but I do recognize that there is a need for it in some cases, and it's not an easy technology in some cases to convert from. However, I don't think that it should be subsidized in any way by the Virginia government or the federal government for that matter. I just believe that we should have as many energy options as possible. I think there has been a lot of headway in reducing our dependence on emissions that are dirtier and moving to greener technologies. I'm inspired and impressed with how many Americans have taken upon themselves to purchase hybrid vehicles, to put solar panels on their roofs. And that's where I believe it really begins. It begins with us as a community. We're so much more agile and we're so much more capable than big overhead governments to reduce our consumption. So starting with people is a great way to start. But one of my biggest issues with general pipeline projects is the eminent domain aspect. So that's where I kind of draw the line.
Thank you very much, Delegate Tran.
Thank you. I think that climate change is the most pressing existential question facing us today, as well as our kids and future generations. And we have to be bold in Virginia in tackling this issue. It's not just about the environment and our health. It's also about our economy. And if you see what flooding is doing to, the Newport News, Virginia Beach area, that's a clear, threat to not just the lives of our Virginians living there, but it's also to their livelihoods. And I think that's really important for us to remember when we're talking about the cost of addressing climate change. There's a cost of inaction as well. I'm proud to have passed one of the few green renewable energies that made it out of the General Assembly in the last 2 years, a bill that helps local governments, so local counties, cities, and towns be able to net meter more easily and then save taxpayer dollars for green energy they generate at one site for electricity they use at another. It's like hitting a double or a triple if you're into the World Series right now. But like I said, we have to be hitting some home runs. Just on this question, I do oppose fracking for the greenhouse emissions issue that Delegate Watts brought up, but also just for I think the clear environmental damage it's really we're just starting to understand some of those ramifications. Some of the areas that have increased fracking, we see a lot more earthquakes and things like that, and it's just a really concerning situation, in that we need to be doing our utmost to transition away from the transitioning to green energy, and for those reasons I oppose fracking and oppose the construction of new pipelines.
Thank you. Delegate Lopez.
I thank you for this question. Actually, I'm the founder of the Virginia Environment Renewable Energy Caucus, and I'm very proud of the work I've done over the last several years to address renewable energy and environmental safeguards in the Commonwealth. There are 5 things we need to do yesterday. We need to get into RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Program. We need to have a mandatory renewable energy standard for Virginia that helps put teeth into what the governor has called for to be completely renewable energy by 2050. We need to have a comprehensive package of energy efficiency programs in the state. Right now, several states, most states, are beating us when it comes to energy efficiency. We need to make distributed solar in the best interests of the Commonwealth in our state code. We also need to put teeth into that as well, so that we have distributed solar happening all across the Commonwealth, including lifting the cap. And then finally, we need to have regulations for the State Corporation Commission that actually take into account the importance of the long-term stability of fuel prices, not just the impact on the ratepayer. The fact is that Virginia should be the leader in the Mid-Atlantic, at the very least, with wind off the coast, solar in the valley, hydrokinetic in our rivers. The best place in America to grow switchgrass, which is a biofuel, is in Martinsville, Virginia, a place in desperate need of agro-business jobs. The fact is we're leaving tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars, not just business dollars, but also state taxes, not recordation, but state tax dollars on the table. We should be the leader. We should not be behind West Virginia or North Carolina or any other of our neighbors when it comes to renewable energy going forward.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. So, starting with Ms. Mace, do you believe that public policy can solve gun violence? And if so, what legislation would you take to help to prevent gun violence here in Virginia?
So gun violence is a very complicated issue. Obviously, there's no immediate fix. We had what was called a federal assault weapons bans for specific types of weapons were banned from 1994, expiring in 2004. And if you look at homicide by gun in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that rate remained relatively flat. And even Oxford studies proved that the rate of gun violence was unchanged by the assault weapons ban. Right now, current legislation being proposed does not show any empirical evidence of actually reducing gun violence. So we need to think about, what we're proposing, is it actually going to work? And is what we're proposing actually going to be equitable? One of the laws being floated is a red flag law. This law is an ex parte process where you must show up, or you aren't going to show up in court. Someone's going to show up on your behalf. And then an order will be given to remove your guns for a certain amount of time. That is all done without you in court. That doesn't seem very right when you look at our Constitution and you look at your right to due process. And the ACLU, which by no stretch of the imagination is a pro-gun organization, even said that this is a very risky law. This law can cause a serious problem in enforcement. So I think if we're really going to look at gun violence, I'm not necessarily sure what's on the table at this moment is going to solve it.
Thank you, Ms. Mace. Delegate Tran.
Thank you. I think this is a really important question. I mean, Virginia has a particular history with gun violence given what happened at Virginia Tech and also this year what happened in Virginia Beach. I just want to let everybody know a little bit about kind of the special session that the governor called to make sure that we were able to have some thoughtful debates about gun violence and potential policies that were being put forward to address the situation. After 90 minutes of being in session, the speaker ended the session and we were not able to debate or vote on a single bill, and that we were going to reconvene until after the election. And I think that there were some definite political undercurrents in that session, and it's incredibly important and unfortunate, it's incredibly unfortunate that politics stepped in the way of addressing an issue that affects over 1,000 Virginian lives and an untold number of families and friends who are affected by gun violence each year. And so, the bills that the governor had put forward and that I had supported include expanding our background checks to make sure that they are universal and apply to all gun purchases in Virginia, reinstating the one handgun a month policy, a red flag bill, which would have incorporated due process, but making sure that when an individual is presenting as a danger to themselves or others, that there is a mechanism for law enforcement to help step in to alleviate that situation, and also a ban on high capacity magazines and assault weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Tran. Delegate Lopez.
We had 71 bills last session. 71 bills that did not see the light of day. They were all defeated in a 6:30 a.m. subcommittee meeting of the Militia and Police Committee. Red flag laws, bump stocks, universal background checks, high capacity gun magazines, one handgun a month, legislation that would say that if you are it's a misdemeanor to give a child a firearm if they are 4 years of age and under. A 4-year-old does not understand the responsibility of holding and using and owning a firearm. They're just learning how to name colors, how to tell stories, how to tell time. The fact that we couldn't get that legislation out of subcommittee, there's something wrong. Also, we've so whittled down sensible gun violence legislation and parts of our code for the last 21 years that you can now get a concealed carry permit without actually ever touching a gun. All you have to do is take a quiz online again and again and again until you pass. That doesn't make sense. The fact is that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, more people are dying from handguns and firearms than motor vehicle deaths. Why is that? That's because we put in sensible regulations after extensive study to address ways to make driving safer. It's not just violent crime, it's access to the gun for someone who might be having suicidal thoughts. And so the fact is that sensible gun violence prevention legislation needs to get passed. It needs to get passed now. If you get a Democratic majority next session, you'll get those bills.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
Thank you. Adding to what Delegates Tran and Lopez have just shared, and I share all of those concerns, let me emphasize that of the gun deaths in Virginia, 2 out of 3 are suicides. That we have a serious problem, not just in what hits the headlines, but day in, day out problem of the availability of guns. And without the proper checks, without a universal background check, which yes, can exclude exchanges between family members, but it should definitely not exclude those who are outside of gun shows week after week after week, selling commercially and not then being subjected at all to the background checks of those who are buying. I was on the school safety task force that was formed by the majority last year. We were not to deal with guns at all in that school safety task force. But I do want to assure those who are watching that Virginia, because of Virginia Tech, has a number of very significant safety measures within our schools which lead the nation. So we have done again and again whatever we can do, but we still come back to that bottom line. I do not believe America is more violent than other Western nations, but when you look at UN figures, the difference is not the number of homicides per person, it is the number of homicides per gun in circulation. And we have 3 to 4 times the number of guns in circulation.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. So the next question is, we're going to start with Delegate Tran. Do you support restrictions on abortion? And if so, what are those restrictions? And what steps will you take to impact a change, if changes are to be made, during the next legislative session?
All right. Thank you. So I believe that, women should be empowered to make decisions about their health care in consultation with their doctors, and I trust them to make those decisions. And I think it's really important to note that Virginia has a number of different restrictions on the books currently that make it difficult for women to access this medical procedure. And I think it's really important that we are able to ensure that women are have the ability to access to be able to access, safe and legal abortions in Virginia. So, for example, and there was just a recent court ruling about this issue, and I think that might be continuing in that process. But, for example, right now, women have to wait 24 hours. They have to undergo, an ultrasound. They have to read a lot of different types of literature that is really meant to shame them in this process and things like that. And I think that those are, definitely things that we should be removing, those types of barriers. This impacts working women, poor women, rural women, for whom access to this medical procedure and having to take time off from work and things like that becomes really difficult. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Tran. Delegate Lopez.
I believe in a woman's right to choose. I believe in a woman's right to choose. And women should have complete control over what they do with their own bodies. The fact is that we have a lot of unnecessary limitations on a woman being able to get access to the health care they need or access to an abortion. And those have been put in over the last 2 decades with one intent: to, in some cases, shame, like with the transvaginal ultrasound bill that made national headlines and also made Virginia a laughingstock. And also things like the TRAP legislation, things like the fact that you have to have these waiting periods, things that in some cases you're being given incorrect or faulty information about what options a woman might have. That needs to stop. There should be nothing getting between a decision that a woman makes with the advice of their physician and their family. And the fact is that every time the government gets in between that, I think bad things happen.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
Again, I have seen this legislation for literally many years as it comes before the Criminal Law Subcommittee. It is not considered as a health issue, it is considered as crime. And with that, we have black and white definitions that absolutely do not reflect the complexity of the personal decisions of families, especially in later life decisions that I am going to start my family at 35, at 40, and all of the complexities that may bring up. The complexity of in vitro fertilization, where this is opposed because it is regarded that any fertilized egg that is kept from implanting would be an abortion. And that kind of material has been handed me again and again. I'm a strong defender of birth control. Why would I worry about birth control in this day and age? Because that same definition is applied by a number of advocates who say anything that keeps that fertilized egg from implanting is an abortion. The 10 days that it may take for that egg to implant is an abortion. I go back to when my second child was born. That was when Connecticut versus Griswold was decided, that said that states could not ban birth control. I am very concerned in our court decisions that we are not only dealing with all of the complexities of reproductive health decisions that are made under Roe v. Wade, but also the very basic issue of being able to be responsible parents by use of birth control.
Thank you, Delegate Watts. Ms. Mace.
So I am precisely the demographic that people talk about when they talk about abortion. I had 2 children under the age of 20. I was exactly the poster child that is often used for this argument. As a libertarian, this is pretty simple. It's your body, it's your choice, you are an autonomous individual that the government has no right to regulate. That being said, we can't force others to pay for that decision either. I believe that the best way to appease everybody is to look at birth control availability. You shouldn't have to go to a doctor's office to get birth control. I believe there should be a pathway, whether it be online, through a virtual consultation, a simple, easy pathway for you to get birth control immediately, when you need it, as you need it, and it's no one's business but yours. I don't want to get into the ins and outs of partial birth abortions because they are rare, but my only philosophy on it is that while the fetus is in your body, it is your choice, it is between you and your doctor. Once the fetus has been born, then I do believe that every life-saving effort should be made, because at that point, it is now an autonomous individual. But otherwise, it's simple to me. Treat women like autonomous individuals who have control over their body. Let them make their choice between them and their doctor, and we won't ask you to pay for or be involved in any way.
Thank you, Ms. Mace. Okay, the next question, we'll start with Delegate Lopez, is about nonpartisan redistricting. And do you support nonpartisan redistricting? Do you think there's a pathway to it before the 2021 census, when we will redraw our districts?
I believe strongly. I mean, for 8 years now, in fact, in my very first campaign, I basically said that citizens should choose their legislators and not the other way around. That's the value I stand by. And I believe in a strong nonpartisan redistricting commission approach to how we address gerrymandering in the Commonwealth of Virginia. In fact, I think we should have that at the national level as well. The constitutional amendment that was passed and that I voted for definitely has there are some people quibbling about what it does and whether or not there are poison pills in there. But at this stage, I would support that legislation. I think we need to have a robust discussion of where we're going, and I think it maybe needs some enabling legislation around it to help strengthen it and make sure that it's doing what we intend it to do. But I supported that bill last session.
Thank you. And Delegate Watts.
We are at a critical point in redistricting. This is the election that will determine the next 10 years of redistricting. Therefore, what is on the table, given to pass a constitutional amendment, it has to pass with the identical language in one session followed by an election and then our next session. The only way that we will get nonpartisan redistricting is to support the amendment that was passed in the last session so that the voters can decide on it in the next election. Anything that is quibbling over this is in fact undercutting, deep-sixing the chance of nonpartisan redistricting. I am such a strong supporter of nonpartisan redistricting for all kinds of reasons, but I'll get personal for a moment. I have had 40% new district the last and 42% new district the following election. People that I represented before, I no longer represent, but then I got another one and how in the world do voters hold me accountable when they don't even know who represents them, when the lines go down streets and around corners, when 2 elections in this last session, in this last election, were decided wrongly because voters were misassigned to where the voter trends had been, and there's certainly strong arguments given the very narrow margin, in one case just drawing it out of a hat. Had voters been properly assigned, that would not have been the issue.
Okay, I'm going to have to call time because we've got 4 minutes left, and we've got 1 minute closing statement. So I would like to give you an opportunity, Ms. Mace, to make your closing statement.
Okay, well, given that I don't currently serve in the legislature, I do support fair and open redistricting. One of the big things that I also would like to bring to the table to Virginia is ranked choice voting. I believe that that would make the entire political process more transparent. A lot of Americans and Virginians have expressed their desire to see third parties have a chance to be elected as well. This could maybe remove some of the discourse between the two parties, maybe break it up a little bit and give a little bit more cooperation to our legislature so that bills aren't hung up as much over partisanship and more discussed in a friendly, open way. And that really is the hope that a lot of us libertarians have, is that we can start discussing things in a friendly, open way. Because even if we don't agree, it's up to us to make it work regardless. So that's basically my closing statement. Thank you very much for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Ms. Mace. Delegate Tran.
Yes, I really appreciated this opportunity, and I'll just use part of my minute to, I too really believe firmly in having free and fair elections, and making sure that we have an independent commission to tackle our redistricting process is really important. I think that the resolution passed. I supported it this past session. I think it was definitely a compromise, but a very positive step in the right direction given where we are currently. And I think coupled with that, we need to have strong policies around the criteria by which these individuals would draw the maps, right? So you have the who plus the criteria. I started off by saying I was really proud of the progress we've made in the last 2 years, but so much more needs to be done and a lot of work ahead, both in making sure that we are continuing to expand access to healthcare, investing into our public schools, being bold on climate change, and continuing to fight for equality for women or LGBTQ Virginians and immigrants and others. So thank you. And my website is kathy4delegate.com. So it's Kathy and then for delegate.com. Come check me out if you're in the 42nd District. Thanks so much.
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you all very, very much for this opportunity to be with you this evening. And thank you for being engaged citizens. It's so vitally important that everyone vote this coming November 5th, because your vote is your voice. My family's been so excited about how Virginia has evolved, how it's changed. And we need to keep changing. We need to keep embracing things like environmental safeguards that actually are environmental safeguards. We need to embrace a social safety net that will last for generations. And we need to embrace new ways of thinking about transit and transportation, sensible gun violence prevention legislation, truly creating an education system in Virginia that lifts everyone up. Thank you for your time this evening. My website is www.alfonsolopez.org. I'd love to have your support. Thank you for your time, and I'd love to have your vote on this coming election on November 5th. Thank you.
Delegate Lopez. Delegate Watts.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much to the League and all the sponsoring organizations and all the volunteers that made this happen. But even more than that, everyone who is watching, thank you. You got a little view of how many issues and the complexity of those issues that are before us. And your involvement, your understanding is absolutely critical to what we all believe in theory, but so often it doesn't really pan out, as too many people of special interest, too many limited views, too many games are played instead of the kind of open dialogue represented here tonight. Again, I thank you all for watching, and please vote.
That concludes, thank you, Delegate Watts. That concludes our panel session. Before the panel, I'd like to thank our timers, Rona Ackerman and Ada Raisin, and screeners, and everyone who's worked here in the studio tonight on behalf of bringing you the information you need when you go to the polls on November 5th. Don't let 30% of the electorate here in Virginia decide who is going to represent you in the county, in the State House, and encourage your neighbors, your colleagues, and your coworkers to do the same.